The first thing is just understanding how the data works, right? And so first thing is we have to get a baseline. And so if you immediately put the wearable on and you start looking at the data, I think it's just something to notice and just start to recognize.
Well, welcome back to The Developing Doctor. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Reinking, and this space is about more than just getting through medicine. It's about learning how to actually develop as a physician and a person so that you can sustain your performance, reconnect to purpose, and build a career that works for you. Today, we're diving into a topic that doesn't get talked about enough in medicine, and that's high performance. Not just doing more or pushing harder, but understanding what actually allows people and physicians to perform at a high level over time without breaking. I'm joined today by Dr. Diane Malaspina. Dr. Diane is a psychologist, performance coach, seasoned yoga teacher who specializes in stress and burnout recovery, nervous system regulation, sleep, anxiety, resilience, and optimal performance. She's a former professor and applied psychologist, and she now works with high performing individuals and teams to cultivate sustainable excellence. She also works with Arena Labs, where they combine physiologic data and coaching to improve performance in high stakes environments. Diane, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ben. Glad to be here.
Well, I'd love to just start with that introduction, kind of learn a little bit more about you, what led you to academic psychology and into working with high performers.
Yeah, well, so after I graduated from graduate school, I was a professor at a small university, and really my area of research was resilience and stress. So I was already interested in this area as a student and then as a faculty member. And really what happened to me is I experienced a high degree of burnout and felt very dissatisfied with my reality. Too many expectations, too high workload across areas of acumen, including teaching and research and serving on community outreach and committees in a really competitive environment that didn't feel very supportive. And at the same time, I had been an active, avid yoga practitioner, as well as working on training to be an elite level yoga teacher trainer. And I was studying a lot of anatomy and physiology, as well as Eastern practices like breath work and mindfulness. And at that time, we were starting to see a lot of really robust research from prestigious institutions like Duke University and Harvard. And my area of expertise being stress and resilience, as well as actually living in the yoga practices of breath and mindfulness really all kind of melded well together. And my work as a psychologist was also applied interventions, which basically meant we were taking the research on stress and resilience and we were going out into different settings and applying the research to help people navigate stress better. And
Hmm.
that included physiological stress as well as sleep. And so basically, when I decided to leave academia, I went on to become a consultant and a coach. And interestingly, I was working a lot with families and children, and many of my clients, the parents, were high performers trying to navigate family life outside of their busy and intense professional lives. So I started diving more into high performance because not only was I helping them with their children, I was helping them in their own personal lives, navigating stress and finding a sense of resilience.
Wow, there's a lot there. I'm, just kind of curious with your background and just sort of traditional academia and sort of traditional psychology. And this is what I run into in my coaching practice as well as in medicine is when you think about things like mindfulness and breath work, although there's great evidence behind a lot of those things, there's also some hesitation at times to embrace it when you're working in the stodgy academic environment, let's say. I'm just curious if you encountered that in your career, and was there a time when you realized, "Huh, this traditional approach that maybe I've been taught or that people around me practice isn't enough?"
Yeah, such a great question. In the beginning of all of this, I really kept the two in two separate boxes. I was like the academic researcher, interventionist, and then I was like the yoga on the side. And so I would find opportunities to kind of sneak in the mindfulness practices when I was live with clients, but I still kept them oriented toward what we knew about those practices from the scientific lens. But what ended up happening interestingly, so we're talking, around 2008, 2009, when they were very separate categories.
Mhm.
But some really great research came out in around 2015 from Sarah Lazar over at Harvard. And that really started to normalize the conversation about bringing in these practices because the research was robust enough and across a large enough population of people that I was actually starting to get called upon as an expert in that area. So it was very exciting for me because I went from purposely keeping those two areas in two separate boxes into being asked to give talks and to give trainings to others on how to bring and meld the two together. So there still is resistance. It's interesting. I was giving a talk last week to a group of surgeons. And when they read the bio that you just shared, at first, they mentioned, do we want to bring up the yoga part? And I said, yes, because the Eastern practices are old. And one thing that we know is, and this, you can probably relate to this in medicine too, there are some things that are tried and true that still hold case in
Yes.
terms of working that are old in terms of what we know. And so I don't always use the lens, like, yes, in my personal life, I like to live by the lens of the Eastern philosophical practices. But when I'm working with people, I'm meeting them at their comfort level. And that's where I really bring in the science to support it to get the buy in.
I like that, meeting people kind of where they are. And have you worked with people who have had kind of an aha moment and say, "Oh, yes, this really does work"? And are there things that tend to click more with those doubters than others?
Yeah, the foundation of mindfulness practices is awareness. And so, really, if we bring awareness to something, we use data. Like when you and I worked together, we worked with heart rate variability. We used biometric device to measure that, as well as looking at sleep, right? And so, when we start to use the practice of awareness and apply it to something like data, and then we make that connection between data and behavior, or data and what happened through the course of the day,
Mhm.
and give the individual an opportunity to reflect on how all those pieces fit together for their personal experience, it
Uh-huh.
is that aha moment. It is that moment where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that missing 2 hours of sleep and working from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night really exacerbated my ability to navigate stress and really and hampered my ability to sleep well. And I also don't feel good in the moment. Like I feel edgy and I feel exhausted. And oh, now I want to try to run 5 miles and I just don't have the gas in the tank to do it.
Yeah.
That level of awareness can really show up. And then how does it apply to the daily work, load in front of you? And it's something like, oh, I'm trying to really solve something complex, or I'm trying to have a difficult conversation either with my team or with colleagues or with a family, and I'm having a difficulty doing that because I'm not rejuvenated and charged in a way that helps me perform my best.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanna talk a little bit more about my experience in a minute, but I would wanna kinda pivot back to that term high performer that you used. And, when people hear high performer, and I think in medicine, we think, "Oh, people that got the highest board score or someone who got into the most competitive residency," and, we think of achievement and productivity and what people do. How do you sort of define high performer?
I define it as anyone who wants to be great at something. And it's anything. It started for me, it was people who want to be great at parenting.
Mhm.
It's people who want to be great at their acumen in their work life. Like I said, I'm working with surgeons, so the things that they need to be great at is different than what a nurse needs to be great at. It's different than what somebody who's an engineer needs to be great at. Right. And so everyone that wants to be great at something in my book is a high performer. And that desire to be great is paired with a yearning to be able to figure out how to do that.
Oh, I love that. When I think of high performers, I mean, I think of people like the Olympians, right? Like Simone Biles or Michael Phelps. And so the elite of the elite, right? In some way. But I like that you made it approachable, and anyone who wants to be great in whatever that looks like for them can be a high performer.
Yeah.
What separates, the high performers who are able to perform well and maybe improve and grow and sort of be on this trajectory that lasts, let's just say, a lifetime? So what separates people that are able to sustain that from those who maybe aren't, from those who burn out or feel disillusioned or maybe lose their way?
I'd say one thing that's important is distinguishing between people who manage time versus people who manage energy, right? And so when I think of our life, right? And this was another thing that kind of comes from, the more esoteric practices, but they talk a lot about life force. Even in Chinese medicine, it's this whole thing around life force. Well, when we make the equivalent to that in Western medicine, that's your nervous system, right? That's the amount of energy that
Uh-huh.
you have in order to regulate all the processes inside under the hood, right? So the nervous system takes care of everything about us as a human that we don't realize that is working for us, that we don't pay attention to, but that keeps us alive and keeps us functioning and functioning well. And so I'd say the first thing is learning how to manage your energy. And the people that live well long and perform well and to high levels for long periods of time and even improve past age limits. Like I love to see those people that, in certain endeavors, they say they peak in their 20s and 30s, but we see them actually peaking into their 40s and their 50s. I think of my dad who was a golfer and he was peaking in his 60s at golf, which was really exciting to see. But it's those people who learn how to navigate their energy at given points of time in their life. And again, the best regenerator in terms of energy is sleep, and it has to be quality sleep, right? But we also can think about in the day to day, the way that we go about our nutrition, the way that we go about movement and exercise, the way that we engage with others socially, right? Those are like the nutrients of life that actually regenerate us. And yes, our work does a lot for us too. But if we are more oriented to how much can be done in a given amount of time versus comparing that to the type of energy that we bring to getting things done, those that orient more to time tend to start to fall into that burnout loop and will experience burnout again and again. And for me, the way that I ended up finally healing from 3 bouts of intense burnout was really diving into this and getting away from time management and much more into energy management. And that is the key. And I think about that too, because, longevity is such a focus, not such a hot topic.
Uh-huh.
And, I think too about people even understanding their energy. I'm in my 50s, right? My energy is just different than it was when I was in my 30s, and that's okay. And so I tend to my 50-something-year-old energy better than I did to my 30-something-year-old energy, and I feel so much more vitality and mental acuity than I do now than I did then. And we would think I would have more of that 20 years prior.
Yeah.
But it's all about managing your energy system is really key for performance and avoiding burnout and getting stuck in the time trap. And I think time also invokes the mental state of fear. There's the day to day, like, I didn't get enough done in the given amount of time I did. And then I don't get quality sleep because I'm so worried about what I have to do tomorrow. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the time trap of, I'm getting old and I have to fight this, right? And so I think if we can orient ourselves more toward our life force, our life energy, and just know that time is a construct and that, yeah, we have jobs and we have appointments and we have things to create a structure, right? And that's good for us. And we can live within that structure, but we can also use that structure to make sure that we have the time to regenerate and to plug back into ourselves.
Oh, I love that. There's something in what you said about, once you spend time, it's sort of gone, right? So in some ways, I just think you can't get that time back, right? You hear people say that all the time. But there's
Yeah.
something about energy and especially this approach with using your nervous system and modulating your nervous system, you can replenish your energy. And there's something just there in that thought of, shifting to replenishing my energy versus spending time sits with me a little bit better, I think.
I like that.
One of my biggest takeaways, and you kind of hit on this in working with you and working with Arena Strive was just realizing how much of my day was relayed in my physiology, right? So looking at the heart rate variability or looking at my sleep from the day before or whether or not I had a drink, all of that was actually very reflected in the data when I sat down to look at it. And that was something that I hadn't made a connection to. And I'm coming from a place where I was an athlete before, we're very aware of how much I sleep as a physician and through training. And why do you think people miss that connection or what are people missing when they ignore the physiology and focus on maybe how they on the stress alone?
I think a lot of things in life, we in the short term relieve stress, but in the long term add stress. And I think that using a wearable helps us recognize that, right? So the classic is, it's after work, I'll have a drink, right? Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes alcohol does kind of take the edge off a little bit in the short term, but in the long term, it's highly disruptive to quality sleep, right? And so if we know that sleep is our biggest regenerator, yeah, the alcohol might have that slight short-term impact in helping relax us a little bit, but the long-term impact is that it robs us of the very thing that provides us with longer term energy to meet the demands of the next day. So I think what's tricky about modern life is there's a lot of things that in the moment seem to be like a good break or something that relaxes us, but it actually taxes us. So
Mhm.
I think things like scrolling on our phones, and I think of like alcohol, or I think of staying up late and watching, binge watching things on Netflix and things like that, where, or, and a common one too is like a really intense workout where we think like, "Oh, I really wanna push myself. I really wanna get that endorphin rush. I wanna feel exhausted when I'm done." But if we had an incredibly stressful and busy day and we've already, had to confront a lot of allostatic load, which is the combination of both cognitive and physical load that we have to face in order to navigate, stress in life, if we've already had to endure a lot of that physically and cognitively through our day, and then we add it through our physical workout, we actually can deplete ourselves. So we kind of get tricked by the things in the moment that feel really good, but that in a 24-hour or 48-hour span can actually deplete us. So I think what the data and the physiology does when we track that is it starts to help us understand more of like a circadian rhythm
Mhm.
around the course of a 24-hour period or a 48-hour or even a week in our rhythms versus thinking in the moment what helps us relieve stress or feel better.
Mm, I like that. You mentioned the cognitive load and sort of just the physical load. And one of the things that I think would surprise people who don't work in healthcare is that no matter what you do as a healthcare provider, it is, people are aware that it's very cognitive, but it is very physical as well. And that's not even counting the surgeons who definitely have a physical job. So, in many other high performance fields, coaching is expected, but in medicine and healthcare, there's often a little bit of resistance, I find, just to the word coaching. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. And one thing that I've recognized is that in the medical profession, the training is diagnosis and prescription,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And in coaching, it's more there's like sometimes coaches give direct feedback and give you something direct protocol to do, right? But really, powerful coaching is about introspection, awareness, reflection, and choice.
mm,
And so it's not so much it's a little bit diagnostic. We can use assessments in the coaching to better understand different things that are going on with an individual. We can go through question and answer in order to understand things. And so it's a little bit diagnostic, but at the same time, it's a lot more about meeting what someone needs in the moment in the midst of their direct experience. And so the fruits of the coaching call are what a person shows up with when they join the call. And
mhm,
so it's not like something that's going to happen every time, right? And so what I think is a little bit maybe a new way of viewing the relationship when a medical professional comes to a coach is that the coach isn't going to tell you, isn't just going to hear about what's going on in your life and then tell you what to do. And then you're going to walk away and do it. Right. So it's not as diagnostic and prescriptive. It's more like exploratory, and at least from the work I do, I know that the answer is within you because who knows you best? You. So
yes.
I can give you a lot of information. And so I use a very educational approach. We talk about, well, here is the data and this is what it means. And what are some things that can be going on? And why might this be adding to your allostatic load?
Mm,
Right. And then I pass the ball over to the client and say, what do you think about it? Maybe we just start being aware of it and we do nothing. And then once we cultivate the awareness, then we can action plan and have goals and like create protocol for the way that you want to live. So I think it's more so of a process than, and look, medicine is, outside of like surgery, but thinking of like day to day practice, you're seeing many people in a short amount of time. So
Yeah.
you've got to get really quick at diagnosis and really quick at prescribing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I think, I think that's a really good insight. Coaching at times is very slow, right? That process of becoming self-aware takes time, and I do think that is probably one of the biggest barriers for physicians, now that you say that.
Yeah.
What I really liked about working with you and about the Strive program was actually the wearable and having that physiologic data. I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but what do you think the value is of having that real-time physiologic data, maybe especially for physicians or healthcare providers or people who are really black and white and concrete and want something that's a little more prescriptive? Can it help bridge the gap, or how do you think it fits in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is just understanding how the data works, right? And so first thing is we have to get a baseline. And so if you immediately put the wearable on and you start looking at the data, I think it's just something to notice and just start to recognize. But in the first 2 weeks to a month, the data isn't that meaningful until we start to see the trend lines. And the thing is we as a society within medicine and outside of medicine, we like to get scores on things, right? We like to see a number and then we like to rate ourselves on what that number means. But really, what heart rate variability, especially as a score in terms of getting that data from a wearable, is what it's telling you is how resilient is your system to navigating stress and how ready is it to perform in the next 24 hours. And so the first thing is understanding that you want to understand your baseline. Like, what is your, when you first start wearing that wearable, where is it that you're falling in the terms of you as just you? You're not comparing your number to anyone else, but what is it for you in terms of where you fall in navigating stress? So once you get your baseline, then you have the opportunity to start to reflect on, okay, how do I feel in relation to this score? Do I feel exhausted all the time? Do I feel like I'm dealing with brain fog or I'm dealing with lapses in mental acuity? Am I finding myself fine at work, but by the time I get home, I am not able to be present in my personal life? Right. So,
Mhm.
those are all signs that you can then go back to the data and start to make the connection between, okay, when I am feeling depleted, my scores are lower and when I actually have time to regenerate, if I'm taking micro breaks during the day, if I'm hydrating appropriately, if I've got good nutrition, good movement, if I'm sleeping well at night, and hey, I take some free time during the weekend and I really disconnect from work, my score gets higher.
Yeah.
And hey, let me see how I perform. Once I notice that my score gets higher, what's my work life like? What's my personal life like? So it's like a great opportunity to use the data to connect the dots between the lived experience and what you're seeing in terms of the data that's showing up on the wearable.
And do you think there downsides to having the data? I know I just recently was looking at my data from the weekend and I had a couple days where everything was a little bit low. I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing this wrong. I'm like failing." Are there downsides to using the data?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, like, feeling personal about it, like taking it too personally is one, and I've had, there are people that have told me that it's not common, but it's common enough, like, I don't know if I could put this isn't from research, but I would say out of the people I've worked with anecdotally, I don't know, 10% of people don't like wearing a wearable because the score makes them feel like they have to work really hard to get the score up. Right, and so it kinda defeats the purpose of reflecting on the data. It's like they're wearing the wearable in order to just keep striving toward the data, right? Now the data we can use the data as a goal, but it's kind of tricky, and sometimes I see, things in media where they'll say, "Oh, you'll get your HRV up 50 points in 6 months," or,
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting and inaccurate way to look at data. I think it's more so about making it as a connection between how you feel and in terms of your energy and even your mood and your ability to perform and then to really gauge it that way. One thing that if you find yourself being overly critical of yourself because of the data, it
Mhm.
could be a good idea to take a break and to talk to somebody who is an expert in how to use the data so that you have a better mindset around it.
That makes a lot of sense. So if someone's listening to this and they're just curious about where to start, they want to maybe start looking at physiologic data and pairing it with how they feel or pairing it with coaching, how can they work with you or how can they work with Arena Labs and what are next steps that they can take?
Yeah. So I have my own coaching business, and it's under my name and my website. I think you'll probably share that in some resources at some point. So feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to explore. It would start with a discovery call, and then we could just free complimentary discovery call. Just help me understand what it is you would like to learn about and get out of coaching, and decide if I would be the right fit. And I work one on one. I work with small groups. I work in businesses. I work in medical settings. And then I also do coaching for Arena Labs. And Arena Labs is works with high performance medicine. They work with hospital systems and teams, and they actually have their own app. And the app hosts digital coaching as well as 30 science backed performance tools geared toward the medical setting. And with that, the hospitals contract out with Arena Labs. So it's not right now. It's not commercial for individual users.
Mhm.
But if you're interested in having your hospital system, feel free to contact me, email me, and I can connect you with the folks at Arena Labs. But basically, it's an 8-week program if you go through Arena Labs. So in the program, if the hospital contracts, the users get a wearable as well as digital coaching and one on one coaching with a high performance coach. And if you want to work with me separately, it's different. It's longer engagement, it's hour-long sessions, it's more personalized. I can recommend wearables if you're interested in using data. I have clients that just purchase their own wearable, and then we go through the data and talk through that. So yeah, there's a variety of ways to explore coaching.
And what are the benefits that you've seen in the clients that you work with personally? Sort of what kind of transformation or what kind of journey can people expect through coaching with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's unique about the what I offer as a psychologist who's a coach is that I'm really great at helping people understand the underlying patterns that got them to where they are in the first place. So if they are feeling burned out or overwhelmed, or they're feeling like stuck in some way and that they aren't able to reach the level of performance that they want to be reaching, we do spend some time looking at patterns, whether it's patterns of being a perfectionist, whether it's somebody who's kind of like a people pleaser and all their energy goes out and none of their energy comes back in. And so that's a little bit unique to high performance coaching, where we get a little bit into the personality characteristics.
Hmm.
And again, once we just sort of talk through them and bring awareness to them, it's not like they have to do something, they just have to recognize it. And then we start getting more into like, let's set some goals, and here are some tools, and what works best for the individual in terms of their schedule and their lifestyle and what they want to do. Because so oftentimes people will come at it with like that prescription of like, these are the 10 things that you do to be a high performer. But not everyone wants to do those 10 things. It's really about finding the things that you wanna do, that you wanna add to your life, that you love, that make you feel good, that you're like, "Yes, I wanna do this because it also helps me become a high performer and a better person."
I love that. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time. I think this has been a really thoughtful and helpful conversation, and I really appreciate your work and the time that I spent working with you. I found it really valuable. And so thanks for what you do. I think one of the key takeaways for me is that high performance really isn't about doing more. It's about understanding yourself better. You can throw your physiology in there, your patterns, your limits, and your potential, but really kind of it just comes down to self-awareness, kind of like you mentioned many times here. And in medicine, we've spent years developing clinical skills, but not nearly enough time developing ourselves. And I think sometimes lose that self awareness for the sake of our title, which is physician or doctor or nurse or whatever a healthcare provider's title happens to be. So for those listening, I'll link Diane's website and our work with Arena Labs in the show notes. You can explore more and please reach out if you like to learn more about her coaching. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague, leave a review, and make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, keep developing.